Welcome to Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. So let us continue. Me, the boy whispered. He had leaned forward on his elbows to peer into the vampire's eyes, and now he drew up. Yes, the vampire went on, as if he hadn't observed the boy's change of expression. You see, they represented the greatest loss to Lestat, because they stood on the threshold of the maximum possibility of life. Of course, Lestat didn't understand this himself. I came to understand it. Lestat understood nothing. I shall give you a perfect example of what Lestat liked. Up the river from us were the Fernier plantation, a magnificent spread of land, which had great hopes of making a fortune in sugar, just shortly after the refining process had been invented. I presume you know sugar was refined in Louisiana. There's something perfect and ironic about it. This land which I love producing refined sugar, I mean this more unhappily than I think you know. This refined sugar is a poison. It was like the essence of life in New Orleans, so sweet that it can be fatal, so richly enticing that all other values are forgotten. But as I was saying, up river from us lived the Ferniers, a great old French family which had produced in this generation 5 young women and 1 young man. Now 3 of the young women were destined not to marry, but two were young enough still, and all depended upon the young man. He was to manage the plantation as I had done for my mother and sister. He was to negotiate marriages, to put together dowries when the entire fortune of the place rode precariously on the next year's sugar crop. He was to bargain, fight, and keep at a distance the entire material world for the world of Fernier. Lestat decided he wanted him, and when fate alone nearly cheated Lestat, he went wild. He risked his own life to get the Fernier boy, who became involved in a duel. He had insulted a young Spanish Creole at a ball. The whole thing was nothing, really, but like most young Creoles, this one was willing to die for nothing. They were both willing to die for nothing. The Fernier household was in an uproar. You must understand, Lestat knew this perfectly. Both of us had hunted the Fernier plantation, Lestat for slaves and chicken thieves, and me for animals. You were killing only animals? Yes. But I'll come to that later. As I said, we both knew the plantation, and I had indulged in one of the greatest pleasures of a vampire, that of watching people unbeknownst to them. I knew the Fernier sisters, and as I knew the magnificent rose trees around my brother's oratory. They were a unique group of women. Each in her own way was as smart as the brother. One of them, I shall call her Babette, was not only as smart as her brother, but far wiser. Yet none had been educated to care for the plantation. None understood even the simplest facts about its financial state. All were totally dependent upon young Fernier, and all knew it, and so larded with their love for him, their passionate belief that he hung the moon, that any conjugal love they might ever know would only be a pale reflection of their love for him. Larded with this was a desperation as strong as the will to survive. If Fernier died in the duel, the plantation would collapse. Its fragile economy, a life of splendor based on perennial mortgaging of the next year's crop, was in his hands alone. So you can imagine the panic and misery in the Fernier household the night that the son went to town to fight the appointed duel. And now picture Lestat, gnashing his teeth like a comic opera devil because he was not going to kill the young Fenrir. You mean then that you felt for the Fenrir women? I felt for them totally, said the vampire. Their position was agonizing, and I felt for the boy. That night he locked himself in his father's study and made a will. He knew full well that if he fell under the rapier at 4 a.m. the next morning, his family would fall with him. He deplored the situation and yet could do nothing to help it. To run out on the duel would not only mean social ruin for him, but would probably have been impossible. The other young man... What the... What in the world just happened? Oh my goodness. Would have pursued him until he was forced to fight. When he left the plantation at midnight, he was staring into the face of death itself, with the character of a man having only one path to follow. He resolved to follow it with perfect courage. He would either kill the Spanish boy or die. It was unpredictable. Despite all his skill, his face reflected the depth of feeling and wisdom I had never seen on the face of any of Lestat's struggling victims. I had my first battle with Lestat then and there. I prevented him from killing the boy for months, and now he meant to kill him before the Spanish boy could. We were on horseback, racing after the young Fenrir towards New Orleans. Lestat bent on overtaking him. I bent on overtaking Lestat. Well, the duel, as I told you, was scheduled for 4 a.m. on the edge of the swamp, just beyond the city's northern gate. And arriving there just shortly before 4, we had precious little time to return to Point du Lac, which meant our own lives were in danger. I was incensed at Lestat as never before. He was determined to get the boy, give him his chance. I was insisting, getting hold of Lestat before he could approach the boy. It was midwinter, bitter cold, and damp in the swamps. One volley of ice rain after another sweeping the clearing where the duel was to be fought. Of course, I did not fear these elements in the sense that you might. They did not numb me, nor threaten me with mortal shivering or illness. But vampires feel cold as acutely as humans, and the blood of the kill is often the rich, sensual alleviation of that cold. But what concerned me that morning was not the pain I felt, but the excellent cover of darkness these elements provided, which made Fenrir extremely vulnerable to Lestat's attack. All he need do would be step away from his two friends towards the swamp, and Lestat might take him. And so I physically grappled with Lestat. I held him. But towards all this, you had detachment, distance. The vampire sighed. Yes, I had it. And with it, supremely resolute anger to glut himself upon his life of an entire family was to me Lestat's supreme act of utter contempt and disregard for all he should have seen with a vampire's depth. So I held him in the dark, where he spit at me and cursed at me, and young Fenrir took his rapier from his friend, and a second went out on the slick, wet grass to meet his opponent. There was a brief conversation, then the duel commenced. In moments it was over. Frenier had mortally wounded the other boy with a swift thrust to the chest. He knelt in the grass, bleeding, dying, shouting something unintelligible at Frenier. The victor simply stood there. Everyone could see there was no sweetness in the victory. Frenier looked on death as if it were an abomination. His companions advanced with their lanterns, urging him to come away as soon as possible and leave the dying man to his friends. Meantime, the wounded one would allow no one to touch him, and then Frenier's group turned to go. The three of them walking heavily towards their horses. The man on the ground drew a pistol. Perhaps I alone could see in the powerful dark, but in any event, I shouted to Frenier as I ran towards the gun, and this was all Lestat needed. While I was lost in my clumsiness, distracting Frenier, going for the gun itself, Lestat, with his years of experience and superior speed, grabbed the young, speared him into the cypresses. I doubt his friends even knew what had happened. The pistol had gone off. The wounded man had collapsed, and I was tearing through the near-frozen marshes shouting for Lestat. Then I saw him. Frenier lay sprawled over the knobbed roots of a cypress, his boots deep in the murky water, and Lestat was still bent over him, one hand on Frenier that still held the foil. I went to pull Lestat off, and that right hand swung at me with such lightning speed I did not see it. Did not know it had struck me until I found myself in the water also, and of course by the time I recovered, Frenier was dead. Oh. I saw him as he lay there, his eyes closed, his lips utterly still, as if he were sleeping. Damn you! I began cursing Lestat, and then I started for the boy of Frenier and began to slip down into the marsh. The water rose over his face and covered him completely. Lestat was jubilant. He reminded me tersely that we had less than an hour to get back to Point du Lac, and he swore revenge on me if I didn't like the life of a southern planter. He'd finish you tonight. I know a way, he threatened me. I ought to drive your horse into the swamps. You'd have to dig yourself a hole and smother. He rode off. Even over all these years, I feel the anger for him, for a white-hot liquid filling my veins. I saw then what being a vampire meant to him. He was just a killer, the boy said, his voice reflecting some of the vampire's emotion, not regard for anything. No, being a vampire for him meant revenge. Revenge against life itself. Every time he took a life, it was revenge. It was no wonder, then, that he appreciated nothing. The nuances of vampire existence weren't even available to him because he was focused with a maniacal vengeance upon mortal life he had left. Consumed with hatred, he looked back. Consumed with envy, nothing pleased him unless he could take it from others. And once having it, he grew cold and dissatisfied, not loving the thing for itself. And so he went after something else. Vengeance, blind and sterile, contemptible. But I've spoken to you about the Frenier sisters. It was almost 5:30 when I reached their plantation. Dawn would come shortly, after 6, but I was almost home. I slipped onto the gallery of their house and saw them all gathered in the parlor. They had never even dressed for bed. The candles burnt low. They sat already in mourners, waiting for the word. They were all dressed in black, as was their at-home custom, and in the dark, the blue-black shapes of their dresses massed together with their raven hair. so that in the glow of the candles their faces appeared as 5 soft shimmering apparitions, each uniquely sad, each uniquely courageous. Babette's face alone appeared resolute. It was as if she had already made up her mind to take the burdens of the Fernier if her brother died, and she had that same expression on her face now, which had been on her brother's when he mounted to leave for the duel. What lay ahead of her was nearly impossible. What lay ahead was the final death of which Lestat was guilty. So I did something which caused me great risk. I made myself known to her. I did this by playing the light. As you can see, my face is very white, and has a smooth, highly reflective surface, rather that of a polished marble. Yes, the boy nodded, and appeared flustered. It's very beautiful, actually, said the boy. I wonder if... But what happened? You wonder if I was a handsome man when I was alive, said the vampire. The boy nodded. I was. Nothing structurally is changed in me. Only I never knew that I was handsome. Life whirled about me, a wind of pretty petty concerns, as I've said. I gazed at nothing, not even a mirror, especially not a mirror with a free eye. But this is what happened. I stepped near the pane of glass and let the light touch my face. And this I did at a moment when Babette's eyes were turned towards the panes. Then I appropriately vanished. Within seconds, all the sisters knew a strange creature had been seen, a ghost-like creature, and 2 slave maids steadfastly refused to investigate. I waited out these moments impatiently for just that which I wanted to happen. Babette finally took a candelabrum from a side table, lit the candles, and scorning everyone's fear, ventured out onto the cold gallery alone to see what was there. Here her sisters hovering in the door like great black birds, one of them crying that the brother was dead, and she had indeed seen his ghost. Of course, you must understand that Babette, being as strong as she was, never once attributed what she saw to imagination or ghosts. I let her come the length of the dark gallery before I spoke to her, and even then I let her see only the vague outline of my body beside one of the columns. Tell your sisters to go back, I whispered to her. I come to tell you of your brother. Do as I say. She was still for an instant, and then she turned to me and strained to see me in the dark. I have only a little time. I would not harm you for the world, I said, and she obeyed. Saying it was nothing, she told them to shut the door, and they obeyed. And as they obey, who not only need a leader, but a desperate for one. Then I stepped into the light of Babette's candles. The boy's eyes were wide. He put his hands to his lips. Did you look to her as you do to me? He asked. Chapter 5. You asked that with such innocence, said the vampire. Yes, I suppose I certainly did. Only by candlelight. I always had a less supernatural appearance. And I made no pretense with her of being an ordinary creature. I have only minutes, I told her at once. But what I have to tell you is of the greatest importance. Your brother fought bravely and won the duel, but wait. You must know now he is dead. Death was proverbial with him, the thief in the night about which all his goodness or courage could do nothing. But this is not the principal thing which I came to tell you. It is this. You can rule the plantation. You can save it. All that is required is that you let no one convince you otherwise. You must assume his position despite an outcry. Any talk of convention, any talk of propriety or common sense, you must listen to nothing. The same land is here now that was here yesterday. Morning when your brother slept above, nothing has changed. You must take his place. If you do not, the land is lost and the family is lost. You will be 5 women on a small pension doomed to live but half or less of what life could give you. Learn what you must know. Stop at nothing until you have the answers. And take my visitation to you to be your courage whenever you waver. You must take the reins of your own life. Your brother is dead. I could see her face that she had heard every word. She would have questioned me had there been time, but she believed me when I said there was not. Then I used all my skill to leave her so swiftly I appeared to vanish. From the garden I saw her face above in the glow of her candles. I saw her search the dark for me, turning around and around. And then I saw her make the sign of the cross and walk back to her sisters within. The vampire smiled. There was absolutely no talk on the river coast of any strange apparition to Babette Fenier. But after the first morning and sad talk of the women left all alone, she became the scandal of the neighborhood because she chose to run the plantation on her own. She managed an immense dowry for her younger sister and was married herself in another year, and Lestat and I almost never exchanged words. Did he go on living at Point du Lac? Yes. I cannot be certain. He told me all I needed to know, and great pretense was necessary. My sister was married in my absence, for example, while I had a malarial chill, and something similar overcame me the morning of my mother's funeral. Meantime, Lestat and I sat down at dinner each night with the old man and made nice noises with our knives and forks, while he told us to eat everything on our plates and not to drink our wine too fast. With dozens of miserable headaches, I would receive my sister in darkened bedroom, the covers up to my chin, bid her and her husband bear with the dim light on account of the pain in my eyes, as I entrusted to them a large amounts of money to invest for us all. Fortunately, her husband was an idiot, a harmless one, but an idiot, the product of 4 generations of marriages between first cousins. But these things went well. We began to have our problems with the slaves. They were the suspicious ones, and as I've indicated, Lestat killed anyone and everyone he chose. So there was also always some talk of mysterious death on the part of the coast, but it was what they saw of us which began to talk, and I heard it one evening when I was playing a shadow about the slave cabins. Now let me explain first the character of these slaves. It was only about 1795, Lestat and I having lived there for 4 years in relative quiet, I investing the money which he acquired, increasing our lands, purchasing apartments and townhouses in New Orleans, which I rented, the work of the plantation itself producing little, more a cover for us than an investment. I say our. This is wrong. I never signed anything over to Lestat, and as you realize, I was still legally alive. But in 1795, these slaves did not have the character which you've seen in films and novels of the South. They were not soft-spoken, brown-skinned people in drab rags who spoke an English dialect. They were Africans, and they were islanders. That is, some of them came from Santo Domingo. They were very black and totally foreign. They spoke in their African tongues, and they spoke in French patois. And when they sang African songs which made the fields exotic and strange. Always frightening to me in my mortal life. They were superstitious in their own secrets and traditions. In short, they had not yet been destroyed as Africans completely. Slavery was the curse of their existence, but they had not been robbed yet of that which had been characteristically theirs. They tolerated the baptism and modest garments imposed on them by their French Catholic laws. But in the evenings they made their cheap fabrics into alluring costumes, made jewelry of animal bones and bits of discarded metal which they polished to look like gold. And the slave cabins of Pointe du Lac were a foreign country, an African coast after dark, in which not even the coldest overseer would want to wander. No fear for the vampire. Not until one summer evening, when passing for a shadow, I heard through the open doors of a black foreman's cottage a conversation which convinced me that Lestat and I slept is real danger. The slaves knew now we were not ordinary mortals. In hushed tones the maids told of how, through a crack in the door, they had seen us dine on empty plates with empty silver, lifting empty glasses to our lips, laughing, our faces bleached and ghostly in the candlelight, the blind man a helpless fool in our power. Through keyholes they had seen Lestat's coffin, and once he had beaten one of them mercilessly for dawdling by the gallery windows of his room. There is no bed in there, they confided one to the other, with nodding heads. He sleeps in the coffin. I know it. They were convinced, on the best of grounds, of what we were. And as for me, they'd seen me evening after evening emerge from the oratory, which was now little more than a shapeless mass of brick and vine, layered with flowering wisteria in the spring, wild roses in summer, moss gleaming on the old unpainted shutters which had never been opened, spiders spinning in the stone arches, of course. I pretended to visit it in memory of Paul, but it was clear by their speech that they no longer believed such lies. And now they attribute to us not only the deaths of slaves found in the fields and swamps, and also the dead cattle and occasional horses, but all other strange events. Even floods and thunder were the weapons of God in a personal little battle waged with Louis and Lestat. But worse still, they were not planning to run away. Vice were devils, our power inescapable. No, we must be destroyed. And at this gathering, where I became an unseen member, were a number of Frenier's slaves. This meant word would get to the entire coast, and though I firmly believed the entire coast to be impervious to a wave of hysteria, I did not intend to risk notice of any kind. I hurried back to the plantation house to tell Lestat our game of playing plancha was over. He'd have to give up his slave whip and golden napkin rug and move into town. He resisted, naturally. His father was gravely ill and might not live. I had no intention of running away from stupid slaves. I'll kill them all, he said calmly, in 3s and 4s. All right. So, that is where we have to stop for the day. We will continue tomorrow. All right. Why I have to go to work. All right. So, I've always wanted to read a vampire book that was reminiscent of Lost Boys and Fear Street. So, I wrote one. It's called Vampire Juice. And it has just a splash of teen romance. And here is one of the reviews. When shopping for a costume for Halloween, Sean stumbles upon something called vampire juice. The clerk was acting real weird about it. What's so big about it? What was it? What was it anyway? To find out, he and his friend go through a dark cemetery in a tunnel that was a little confusing. They definitely run into some creepy things along the way. Of course, things get even creepier with the vampire juice. It's a whirlwind of wild and crazy events. You can kind of see a little bit of a similar style to R.L. Stine. Yep. Goosebumps series. A series I loved and contribute to love. The best parts were the actual vampire scenes in the end. I figured somebody was going to turn into a vampire. A nice horror read. Yes. That's awesome. All right. Anyway, my link is in the bio if that is something that may interest you. Thanks for watching, and we will continue reading Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. Thanks for watching.